All right, so yes, indeed, we're moving on to the next one, but not in Lagos. We still have Makwe in Abuja. Makwe.
Thank you, Chamberlain. Yes, we were talking about moving people out of poverty. And we have with us this morning Ismail Ahmed, who is Senior Special Assistant to the President's Social Investment Program. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily.
Thank you for having me.
Well, the Brookings Institute talks about Nigeria going now the poverty capital of the world. It says that if we don't do anything, if we continue along this same trajectory, by 2030, we could be home to 110 million poor people in the world. That's one. And I think, on the other hand, the president is talking about moving 100 million people out of poverty over the next 10 years. Are you seeing policies in place that are aggressive enough to address just as, yes, to address just as aggressively the same way we seem to now be the poverty capital of the world?
Well, thank you for having me. I think, first of all, I would start by saying that, yes, I am seeing a determination on the part of this administration, a zeal on the part of the president, and a commitment that that would give me confidence that we would be able to achieve that target of lifting 100 million people out of poverty. And I'll give you examples of it. Now, when this measurement, whatever it is that they did about Nigeria being the capital of the world, you know, so many of my colleagues, either in government or friends of mine who are outside government, seem to think that, you know, it's a scathing criticism about us being the, you know, poverty capital of the world. And some people are denying it and whatever. But I see it as a challenge, more or less. I see it because it's an acceptable fact that we do have poor people in this country. We have a huge number of population in this country, and there are a lot of people who are living truly in abject poverty. So I think the government, first and foremost, took that seriously, took that as a challenge that we need to do something about poverty. And in a developing economy like ours, which was, you know, and now maybe is, and currently trying to diversify its sources of earnings, it is very important that we focus on lifting people out of poverty. And the policies that government have begun to put in place, social investment programs, which I happen to be part of in the last 3.5 years, is just one out of so many other schemes, be it by the CBN, by the Bank of Industry, the Bank of Agriculture, the Ministry of Agriculture, so many schemes that government is trying to put in place to make sure, and a policy that government is putting together to make sure that it creates a conducive environment so that the private sector would be able to lift people out of poverty and create jobs as a result of that, be it the ease of doing business on the one hand, and then just to make it easy and create an environment where it is easy for people to create wealth and as a result create employment and as a result lift people out of poverty. So yes, I see those policies, but is there room for improvement? Absolutely.
Are we able to measure? I mean, I'll be very surprised if you say that you don't see the zeal on the part of the president, or that there is, you know, there is a move to aggressively tackle where we are in terms of poverty, which is extremely worrisome. However, you know, are we able to measure? Because one of the greatest, even though you have said in so many words that that's your agency. I don't know if you're an agency now, but the program which you are a part of, that's the social investment program, is not the only policy targeted at lifting people out of poverty. You've talked about other agencies of government that are also, you know, making policies to also do the same thing. But are you seeing, how do I describe this now? Are you seeing where you are? I mean, the SIPs, you know, the program, one of the criticisms that has been leveled against it is the fact that, you know, it's not reaching as many people as it ought to reach, that we are not, you know, getting across to as many people as we need to get across to. I think 500 million 500, is it 500 million or 500 billion naira was always earmarked in how many budgets? This time around, people are looking at, there was a misunderstanding about 30 billion naira being earmarked, you know, for the SIPs. That has been corrected now, that it is that the 30 billion naira was actually for capital projects. Do you think that with what we have in the budget, we will be able to reach as many people as we need to reach? And will the policies have a trickle-down effect?
No. Now, let me answer this. I think what I've come to learn so fast, being in government, is that the size of the problem we have, especially in terms of poverty, is way bigger than the solution that we provide. And the social investment happens to be just one of them. But you see, I've also come to realize that government can't solve problem all at once, because there are also other competing demands as we go along. And so we have to move in that direction. This is the first administration, as far as I can remember, and I'm a young person, but as far as I can remember, that has clearly took it as a part of responsibility, moral responsibility, that every government all over the world should be, to set aside certain amounts of money every year, earmark it, and make sure that this is dedicated to the people that cannot fend for themselves, like every moral government or moral organized authority should. Now, have we been able to even access the 500 billion or the 400 billion that have always been earmarked for us since 2016? Absolutely no. We've gotten at most 200 at a particular year, but in some cases less than that. But now the president, that's why the president's probably just said, created a Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Relief and Social Development to now put all these measures that are standing alone together to be able to focus on the issue of humanitarian affairs, including poverty alleviation, so that we'll be able to streamline this and measure exactly as we move forward how we're doing it. On the issue of the budget, you're right. The budget has not been cut down, as a lot of people seem to think that it has been cut down. That was just the capital component of it, which is a very tiny component of it. We still have about 350 billion in the budget for our recurrent, which is mostly a part of our budget because we pay stipends. You know, the difference between what SIP does and what other schemes of government does, especially the CBN and Bank of Industry and Agriculture, and SMEDEN and you name them, is that those are basically focused on wealth creators. So people would have to fill forms, they will have to write an application, they will have to justify how they're going to use the money, it's a loan, it's this and that. But there are those people in the strata of the society that do not know how to write an application, or do not have a collateral to give, or do not have, or don't want a loan. Those people at that bottom of the pyramid is what SIP is especially focused on. Those people who cannot be able to fend for themselves and cannot walk into a CBN with a nice application packet to be able to access either the agricultural financial credit scheme or get something out of SMIDEN. But so it's a layer for everyone, and even the more than 200 billion I think that has been allocated to the Ministry of Works and Housing, it's about construction business. Once you have a lot of infrastructure being constructed, then you have companies working on those construction, and then you have people getting jobs. So there are so many things that the government is trying to work on, attempting to work on to make sure it alleviates poverty as much as possible. But now the goal has been set by the president. It behooves on us now, who are the operators of this many programs, to make sure that we get 10 million people out of poverty every year for the next 10 years. So this is something we're aggressively focusing on.
How are we going to measure that?
We have an impact assessment that is going on, especially for social investment program. We've just set out an impact assessment to see what have we been able to do in the last 3.5 years with all the billions of, we have employed 500,000 unemployed graduates. We have employed about 46,000 non-graduates, still under the Empower scheme. We have given about 2 million petty traders about 10,000 naira for their trader money. We have given about 500 to 600,000 people the market money, starting from about 50,000 upward in cooperative societies and cooperative associations. We have paid about more than 500,000 people the conditional cash transfer of 5,000 naira, the poorest of the poor, in different communities. We are feeding 9.9 million children as we speak in 33 states and about 67,000 schools through 101,000 cooks. And we have started an agricultural revolution from the bottom up, where, you know, we the school feeding, for example, it's a wonderful story. So we're doing, but these are stories that I have noticed in my state, for example, in Kano, how it is impacting. So we set out an impact assessment to get us a feedback, how that has been able to move the pendulum so that we'll be able to know how to refocus, re-strategize if we need to improve on certain things, which I'm sure there will be need for an improvement on so many things, then we will do that. But you see, like I said in the beginning, like you mentioned as well, the size of the problem is huge. If there are 80 million people that are said to be living in poverty in Nigeria, and you have a social investment program that directly impacts on the lives of about 12 million people to 13 million people, and indirectly about 35 million people, you still have close to 50 million people who are not touched by that.
And the figures,
that's a huge gap.
The figures are growing. So, one of the criticisms, again, is that indeed government is trying to, address this issue of poverty, but they're also not addressing the issue of population growth, especially, in places where the people are already poor, and the population seems to be growing at an astronomical rate in those, and at an exponential rate in that area. Why do you think the government seems to be reluctant to state very clearly what its plan is to also ensure that population, I don't want to use the word in check, but that we have a manageable or an educated population as we move forward?
Well, I think what government should focus on, now this is me thinking, right? When you talk about population is a very sensitive issue to a lot of people, and I know that there are a lot of interventions from different leaders, of thoughts, of religious leaders, traditional leaders, government leaders. People somehow just feel that government have no business in telling them how they can reproduce in their families, because these things are tied to culture in some cases. Their religion, people are entitled to what they do or how they create their families or whatever they do with them. I think the job of government is trying to, as much as possible, trying to see that we educate as much people as we can, because I think population growth is not necessarily the problem, is the quality of the population that we are growing. I think that is what government is trying to focus on. But like you're right, I think a lot of people need to get into this conversation. It's not a conversation for government alone.
But government is not starting it.
No,
as a matter of fact, they seem to be shying away from it.
I think that's what I said. I think this there are so many issues that government feel as if there are other people who have direct personal relationship with people that should talk, traditional rulers, religious leaders, for example, and leaders of thought and opinion molders in different regard. But I'm not going to sit down here and tell you what the plan is for government. I'm not in that department. I think that would be a question for the planning department or the census department, whatever it is that handles with that. But I think personally, if I would say my opinion, I think these are things that government should have a conversation with all these leaders of thought, religious leaders, community leaders, to be able to say, hey, where are we going with this? These are the serious issues we have on the ground, and I think we should have a serious conversation down to the minute level on how to deal with this situation. And like I said, it's not how far, it's how well. It's not how many, it's how good.
Is there a linkage amongst all the different, I don't want to say arms now, arms is not the right word to use, amongst the different, let's say, parts of government, or amongst the different agencies of government? You are not yet an agency in that sense, but you're an agency of some sort, implementing government policy. Is there a room where the different programs being thought out by the different institutions of government come together in such a way that there is, let's say, a more strategic approach towards tackling the issue of poverty?
Yes, that's. I think that's part of the approach by creating the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs to house some of these things together, and then I think there are collaborative efforts already with the different arms of government, different sectors of government that does this. The CBN, Bank of Industry, for example, in social investment, we work very closely with the Bank of Industry, especially through GIP, through the giving out of loans. But yeah, there is a room where everybody, the managers of economy, poverty alleviation, right now, I think the ministry is trying to house that as much as possible, where it can have this conversation at some point, discuss maybe with the EAC and when it gets to that with the president, because the president has made this a mandatory mantra that everyone, regardless of where you're working in this government, the goal should be lifting people out of poverty. Whatever policy you're doing, whatever it is you're doing, the goal should be lifting 100 million people out of poverty. That is the marching order. So I think there would be serious collaborative efforts, and government, all the agencies would come together and sit down and have a proper conversation on how to streamline this and make it laser focused on it.
How would you respond to the criticism that on the one hand, government wants to lift people out of poverty? On the other hand, there is a lot of taxing going on. I mean, people are asked to pay. There's an increase in VAT. There's an increase in, I think the amount of charges you have to pay now. There's POS charge. There is, USSD charge, which the CBN is fighting banks to ensure that it doesn't stand and things of the sort. How do you respond to the fact that, to the criticism that on the one hand, government is trying to lift people out of poverty, but on the other hand, it's collecting back from the people?
Well, I don't think taxes doesn't make people poorer. Now, I don't support a lot of these taxes that I had my own criticism when I heard that the VAT is going to go up, but I understand government needs funding, serious funding out of, and I also understand government needs to move away from this rent-seeking regime of just getting the petrodollars and then relying on it to lift all this number of people out of poverty. I understand that any society, any government for that, any country that does not take tax regime seriously is bound to hit a roadblock once in a while, because most of your sources of earnings would either dry up, or we might have issues with international market competition or whatever, and then you will have issues. So tax in itself is not necessarily what people are criticizing. Maybe is the multiple layers of taxes. Maybe is the arbitrary way government wakes up one day, or an agency of government wakes up one day and say the next day, this is what we're going to do without proper consultation, information, awareness, enlightenment. This is what we're going to do this. And there's still cynicism between the citizenry and the government. There's still skepticism about what government does with its own money that has been getting through petrodollars, and why are we going to give it the little money we have to contribute in the opulent and large lifestyle of government or government officials. So, but I think this government is trying as much as possible to move away from that narrative. If we consult and enlighten people as much as we should before any policy that affects people's pockets directly is being carried out, I think there will be a lot of understanding in that regard. Now, I know that there was a conversation I had. It's an informal conversation I've heard from one of the tax administrators, and I was asking him, you can't be squeezing businesses like that. If you want to lift businesses, create businesses, create an conducive environment, tax is one of the first things. Your tax regime is one of the first things people look at. You can't be squeezing small businesses that employ 2, 3, 4, 5 people, restaurants here in Abuja or in Lagos. You can't be squeezing them like that and trying to throw them out of business. And there was something very interesting he told me. He said there's a possibility that there are more than 500,000 incorporated companies or doing businesses in Nigeria, but we probably are taxing, less than 100,000 of them. If we expand the tax base, the taxes can become lower, but then the base has grown, the pie has expanded, so the monies coming in would be larger. And so also for all the personal income taxes and then the informal sector taxes that we're going to do. So there's a lot of work I know that the FIRS is doing to make sure that it reaches as many people, expand the tax base as possible, because the more people paying taxes, the lower the taxes would be, and then the more money government will get, and then the more accountability and responsibility government would have towards executing some of his projects.
Well, there are lots of questions for you, but sadly we have run out of time. I'm seeing people asking what is going on in Sokoto State. We're not filling the SIPs, but I think we'll bring you back another day to take the questions that people are asking concerning the social investment program. We have to thank you for sharing your thoughts with us this morning. Ismail Ahmed is Senior Special Assistant to the President on the social investment program.